Good morning. Today we're starting part of the Shir. We're starting Hilchas Ishus. Hilchas Ishus from the Rambam. It's Perek Aleph. I guess it's also apropos that we're starting Hilchas Ishus today, which is right before Rosh Hashanah, even though the kesher that we try to bring out between the Eden and HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Rosh Hashanah is the kesher of Avinu Malkeinu, and not so much the union of Nisuim like by other Yom Tovim. But nevertheless, there is a tremendous kesher of Nisuim and love between the Jewish people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore that evokes a desire to have a bracha and to have a Riches Yom V'Shanim Tevus, V'Shanim Tevus Mesukah. So everything is b'ashgacha. So the Rambam begins Hilchas Ishus, first of all, by saying the mitzvahs. And one of the first mitzvah is Lisa Isha B'Ksuba B'Kidushin. That the mitzvah of Ishus is to marry a woman with a ksuba and Kidushin. The Mefarshim talk a lot about this. Maybe we'll touch upon it at the end of the shir if we have some time. The Rambam Shita is Ksuba is the Rabbanon, and here it's mashal that Ksuba is part of the mitzvah of the Eraisa. But I want to begin with a very famous Rambam that everybody knows, which is the first halacha. Before Matan Torah meet a woman in the marketplace, if they both had a common desire to get married, he takes her into his house, and he has relations with her in private. And she is therefore his wife. Once the Torah was given to the Jewish people by Matan Torah, so it's a whole different set of laws. Yisrael, the Jewish people were commanded, if a man wanted to marry a woman, he should acquire her, make a kinyan in front of two kosher witnesses, and thereafter she is his wife. The pasuk is, and if a man takes a woman and has relations with her. Commentaries, they explain exactly how the Rambam, what exactly is the proof in the pasuk. So, as you can imagine, the Rambam, as the Rebbe always said, is a sefer halachas. The Rambam isn't a history book. So the first question that comes to mind in a very, very blunt way is, why does the Rambam need to tell us a story of how Kidushin was, how the interaction between a man and a woman who wanted to get married before Matan Torah? L'may nafki mina, what's the difference? We know there are very few places in the Rambam. Among them, we have the beginning of in Hilchas Tefillah, not at the beginning of Hilchas Tefillah, in Hilchas Tefillah, where we talk about stories about the minim. The Rambam says a whole story how Rabbi Gamliel made a bracha, which l'chayra needs explanation. Also, the famous Rambam in Hilchas Avodah Zarah, the beginning of Hilchas Avodah Zarah, where the Rambam brings the whole story of Shem and Sheis and Avram, etc., which also needs to understand why do we need to have a story. Also, this beginning of Hilchas Chanukah by Sheni, but those are probably one of the only places where the Rambam brings, so to speak, a story. So we have to understand, what is the halacha here? What is the Rambam trying to tell us with this halacha, of how Kidushin happened, how the relationship between a male and a female, a man and a wife, happened before Matan Torah? Just start off by saying, Shenitna Torah Yisrael, these are the halachas that a person has to be mekadesh a woman before witnesses, etc., etc. So if you look closely at the Rambam, if you look closely at this Rambam, you'll see that the Rambam is trying to tell you the difference between the way a man and a wife lived in a family way before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah, there were three distinct differences, three very, very important differences, and there is a halacha shebedavar. Number one, the Rambam is telling you that there is a difference between before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah in the fact that before Matan Torah it was random, it was not pre-planned, he was not aware of it. The Rambam uses a very interesting choice of words. Adam pegeya isha. He met a woman. In other words, he got up in the morning. He had no plans on getting married. He had no plans on starting a family. He goes out into the street and pegeya isha. So that's number one. Number two, it was a very quick ceremony, so to speak. It was Adam pegeya isha b'shuk. Imratzahu v'hi, they both agreed. Machnisa leveisei uvayala. He brings her into the house and he has relations with her. A very, very short dating, courtship. Number three, a very important distinction, says the Rambam, it was not public and there was no witnesses. It was beinoi lebeina, machnisa leveisei, ubayala beinoi lebeinatzmei. We have a very strong question. What is the Rambam telling you over here? Obviously, that this wasn't we're not talking about Rishonim. We're not talking about people that had a open relationship, so to speak. So the Rambam is telling you that this was this was not a public affair at all. Just the Rambam is emphasizing that the relationship between man and woman before Matan Torah was not public. How does this contrast with the laws of Kidushin that were given by Matan Torah, which l'chayra is what the Rambam wants to bring out over here? Number one, after Matan Torah, there has to be a preparation involved. A person can't just go and decide very quickly that he is going to meet a wife. In other words, there is a process. There is something she has to. There is a longer process before the actual nisuin takes place. There is the Kidushin. There is the concept of preparation, giving a woman time to prepare. So and also not only that, but there has to be a lot, a more of before Matan Torah, it was Mashuf and Rambam. It was casual. After Matan Torah, the concept of kinyan, we all learned in yeshiva what exactly it means. A kinyan is smichas das, kimidas das, from the woman, from the man, from the husband, from the wife. This is a more planned experience, a more designated, not random. That's number one. Number two, before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah, we said that there was randomness. After Matan Torah, there was a tremendous wait. There was first Edison, and then which is a kinyan of Kidushin, and then Nisuin. Didn't happen just so chick-chock. It didn't happen so quickly. We're not even talking about the laws of Tara, about the laws of Tumah V'Tara. We're talking just the Maisa Kinyan, the Maisa Kidushin. Thirdly, which is probably one of the most important things, the difference between public and private. Before Matan Torah, there was a concept of privateness. Nobody knew about it. There was no pirsum. There was no need for advertisement. After Matan Torah, we had to do it in front of witnesses. So we see here three critical differences between the mitzvah of Kiddushin before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah, and that's what the Rambam wants to emphasize. The Rambam wants to emphasize these three critical points. The same thing, for example, interestingly, the Rambam will tell us in Hilchas Ishus Peri Gimel Halacha Chav Beis that after Matan Torah, it's just the opposite. Hamekadesh v'lo shidduch. If a person is mekadesh a woman without preparation, without a shidduch, says the Rambam. Mekadesh b'shuk. He's mekadesh her. He marries her, so to speak, in the marketplace. Even though maybe there's a technicality in front of witnesses, a rabbi happened to be there. Says the Rambam, Makanese Makas Mardis. He gets a rabbinical set of lashes. We don't want it to be similar to the Kidushin before Matan Torah. We want it to be a plan. We want it to be more with a Yishuv Adas, with a Seichel. Interestingly enough, we will learn later on in the Rambam, towards the end, in Mirz Hashem, Hilchos Melachim, what was the Seder of Gedushin, which is, of course, the opposite of Kiddushin, and we learned many laws of Gedushin and Kiddushin together. What was the Seder of Gedushin, of divorce, by a Ben Noach, by a non-Jew? So, of course, we know that by a Jew, there's a concept of a get, which is a contract, which also is the issue of has to have witnesses, which is similar to the whole issue of Kiddushin. It has to be with Pirsum, has to be with we have to know about it. People have to know about it. And the whole point is, just like a ksuba had to be held for a long time, the same thing a get had to be held for a long time. What was the law of what is the law of Gedushin, says the Rambam, by a Ben Noach, by a non-Jew, in Hilchos Melachim Perek Tes, Halacha Ches, when does a non-Jew create the concept of a divorce? He takes her out of he lets her out of his house, and he sends her away. She goes out of his Rishon's dominion, and she goes away. So we see over here another contrast, which the Rambam is trying to emphasize in the concept of Gedushin and Kiddushin, how this has to be, as opposed to the way it was before Matan Torah, and as opposed to the way it is by non-Jews. So I just want to, so now we understand the reasoning why the Rambam begins Hilchos Ishus with a story telling us how it was before Matan Torah, because these three critical points that happened before Matan Torah, that perhaps even is till today, unfortunately, this brings out the emphasis of how Kiddushin and Nisuin and even Gedushin has to be today. By understanding how it was before Matan Torah, the randomness and the privateness and the fact that it was quick, we see the contrast how it's supposed to be in today after Matan Torah. And of course, we know that the institution of marriage by Jewish people in Torah is called Kiddushin, and Kiddushin has many emphases. The Rogatchover talks about how it's mikudeshes, meaning it's not only nobody else's, but it's also mine. There's also the famous Ramban in the beginning of Parshas Kidushin that tells us what is the meaning of the word Kedusha. Holiness means that a person just doesn't do whatever he wants to do. He could be a novel b'shus ateda. If he can be a disgusting person and still fall within the framework of Torah. Comes the Torah and tells you Kedushim to you, be holy, meaning act in a better way, act more like a higher set of a human being. And this also is alluded to in the act of Kiddushin. I just want to conclude with the minute or two that we have left. Another interesting point for thought, an interesting point, of course, that is a world of discussion, and that is the whole point of what we call in Lashon HaHalacha Kiddushim Ezrachiyim, civil marriage. So the truth is that it's a big discussion. It's very relevant in American society, in Russian society, in general society. What is the status of a man and a woman, very sweet people who live together, Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz, Mr. and Mrs. Cohen, who actually got married in City Hall, and they actually live together like man and wife. And then, unfortunately, they want to split, and she wants to marry another Jewish man. So the question becomes: does the civil marriage have any takeif, have any strength or any basis for requiring that this woman needs a get? And this is a huge issue, a huge polemic in the rabbinic discussion, beginning with Reb Chaim Moshe Grozhinsky, who made a very famous tshuva, and the Rogatchover. And Reb Henkin in America, Reb Henkin was very machmer that Kiddushim Ezrachiyim needs to have a get l'chumra if it's at all possible. If it's impossible, we're makel. So interestingly enough, this Reb Henkin that many American rabbis today are very machmer, very stringent in, because he was the one that required a get l'chumra, a divorce, a certificate of divorce, if it's at all possible, he brings a proof from this Rambam. The proof being that the difference between the institution of marriage before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah, says Rav Henkin from this Rambam, is the concept of pirsum. Before Matan Torah, there was Ben Oila Ben Atzma. He had a he met a woman in the street and he took her to his home. After Matan Torah, it was more of a public situation. So says Rav Henkin, even though there wasn't maybe a Kidushin aspect, but since also based on the famous halacha of Ein Adam Oisa Be'ilase Bilizmus, it's a chazaka that a person doesn't want to have just a relationship with a harlot with his wife. He wants it to be more established, more permanent, etc. Which again, this is a huge polemic in halacha. But he says, Rav Henkin, the fact remains that Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz lived as man and wife, and they were proud of it, and everybody knew that they were man and wife. So this aspect itself of pirsum, of living in a public way, as opposed to a chaplap, private, nothing, nobody knowing about it, nobody caring about it, this says Rav Henkin, would require would establish at least a modicum of nisuin, a modicum of marriage, and would require a get l'chumra. Of course, there's a big machlekes about this. In Eretz Yisrael, they're not so makbid, they don't hold of Rav Henkin. Rabbi Moshe, who was an inheritor of Rav Henkin, he took over, so to speak, the Rabbanis in America. He was a little bit more machmer, and that's for another discussion. I'd like to wish everybody a ksiva v'chsiva teva, a good gebenched year. May ashpes yorim evyoing. We should go to a new year, a year of shefa, bracha, v'atzlacha, a year of Torah, a year of learning, and a year of growth. Thank you very much. Wish on the table, Mr.